Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. I've got a show for you tonight. We're going to talk about some things that just don't add up. Here we've been, at this COVID-19 pandemic for now, this lockdown for a pretty good while. And I know many of you are frustrated and many of you are probably curious as to why we're still in the lockdown. So what I wanted to do tonight is just kind of walk you through a timeline, because there's some questions I think we all need to be asking at this point. Some clarity that we haven't really gotten, some lack of honesty and lack of, we'll just say lack of pulling back the curtain from the powers that be, from the governors, from the governments, and from the politicians, as well as from many of the medical practitioners. So I think it's important that we start asking some serious questions, because at this point, where are we at today? In today's world in the United States, we're now seeing fathers being arrested for playing with their children in the park. We're seeing governments filling in playgrounds with sand to avoid people from playing in them. We're seeing governments close down national parks and state parks and county parks and telling people to shelter in place and go inside and not associate with other people and not approximate with other people at all costs, regardless of the potential that, all of these actions, aside from impinging on our actual constitutional rights, at the cost of saving lives, where you hear all these hashtags, we're in this together, let's save lives together, don't be selfish by getting out there. And a lot of this is really nonsense. In my opinion, as we view this whole ordeal as it's played out, it's becoming to look more and more like propaganda. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the timeline, just to get you guys to start asking different questions, to start maybe potentially looking at this a little bit differently. And if I happen to make some of you mad and you don't like what I'm going to say tonight, then just go away. We don't need your negative commentary. This is for critical thinking only. This is not me trying to insult or assault anyone. This is just me asking intelligent questions, because that's where progress occurs. So if we go backwards in time, so we say, what's fishy about this whole thing? To me, what's fishy about COVID-19 in the very beginning is it doesn't, as a virus, it's never honored Koch's postulates. So those of you who may not know what Koch's postulates are, think of these as the laws of trying to identify whether or not a microorganism actually causes an infectious disease. So initially, we have to identify the actual microorganism. So we ID the microorganism, then we extract that microorganism from whatever was making it sick. So in this case, preferably, we extract the microorganism from a human who was sick with potential disease. Then we take that microorganism and we put it into a healthy human. And if that healthy human becomes sick with the same disease, we now have evidence, scientific evidence, not conjecture, not theory, not probability, not maybe, not coincidence, not guilt by association, but direct evidence that the actual microorganism is actually the culprit. Now, what strikes me as fishy about COVID-19 is, number one, we've actually not even identified the virus itself. We've identified a fragment of the virus. Now, I'm not saying that people aren't dying from COVID. I'm not saying that people aren't getting sick. I'm just, again, asking questions. We've identified the fragment of the virus, and we've approved a test that has an extremely high false positive rate. And some scientists showing 80% false positive. And if you remember in the news, there were several batches of tests that were originally sent out that were actually contaminated with COVID-19. So, and some of the tests, again, some tests were contaminated, which is awful fishy to me, because if we're trying to create a medical test, obviously you don't contaminate it with the very thing you're trying to identify. That just, again, smells wrong, doesn't pass the sniff test. So some tests were contaminated, some were recalled, but how many possible tests were contaminated that weren't recalled? We don't know. We don't have that answer. We were just fortunate enough to catch what we did catch. So these things, to me, didn't really add up in the very beginning, but a lot of people let these things kind of go Why? Because, we were trying to do the right thing to hashtag save lives, right? Do your part to save lives. But so this happened, right? We didn't honor the virus as part of, we didn't actually identify the virus. We didn't go through proper science and rigor to identify that the virus was actually the culprit and not other things, or that it wasn't other things. But then what happened beyond that is, as we tested people and there's a high degree of false positive, what that has a potential to do is inflate the numbers. And this doesn't make sense to me, because if you inflate the numbers artificially, what you do is you create fear and panic, and you change the nature of the way people are going to behave. When you have higher numbers than what is actual, that fear leads to limbic decision making. So you're tapping into your limbic brain, and now people start making decisions not based on intelligence, not based on thought, but based on fear. And fear is a very powerful motivator. And how many times can you recall when you were in a state of panic or state of fear where you made the best decisions of your life? I'm certain that if any of you were saying, yeah, I made the best decision when I was stressed to the max and in solid fear, you're probably lying to yourself. Fear creates bad decision making. And so, again, the test inflated the numbers. And we look at Italy as the model. And this is another kind of doesn't pass the smell test. Italy as the original model, cases rapidly increased and death rates that were being reported were quite high. But after the whole thing kind of subsided, Italy comes back and says death rates, or the deaths, were projected 88% too high, meaning that they were calling everything COVID deaths, even if it wasn't a COVID death. And so we had this, again, artificial elevation potentially in the actual total quantity, but also an artificial elevation in the quantity of deaths that, have come back now and said, hey, we overestimated the quantity of deaths. Now, the rest of the world was watching this. So again, this is a timeline. So then the rest of the world, what do? They make a decision to say, let's shelter in place because we don't want to become Italy. But Italy really wasn't Italy, because what was being reported about Italy was false. So if we now know that Italy was false, but we've made policy, government policy has been put in place to shelter in place. And the reason for this, let's talk about why the shelter in place exists. I think a lot of people have forgotten why shelter in place started in the first place. Shelter in place didn't start or didn't happen as a result of any other reason than to flatten the proverbial curve, right? If you recall in the very beginning, words from Fauci's mouth, Dr. Fauci said, we can't stop the spread. These aren't my words. We can't stop the spread. All we can do is we can shelter in place to flatten the curve. Now, what was flattening the curve? I don't know if a lot of people actually even understand what that actually was designed to do. Flattening the curve was not designed to stop the spread of the disease. It was designed to reduce the overwhelm in hospitals so that doctors weren't so overwhelmed by an unknown disease with no known real treatments. They weren't so overwhelmed that they had to make decisions about who lived or died. Because they didn't have enough hospital beds or they didn't have enough resources to take care of people. So it was the flattening of the curve, which was passed by our government, which was supposed to really end May 1st, right, was designed to prevent overwhelm in the hospitals. It was not designed and never intended to stop the spread, okay, never intended to stop the spread. And so if you recall in the very beginning, what was also said, again, it didn't pass the smell test, is we were being told, don't wear masks. Now, some would argue that we were being told not to wear masks because we didn't want to take away the potential PPE for our hospital workers. So we didn't want people buying up all the masks so that our hospital workers didn't have any. But at this point, we have masks. Masks aren't the issue, but that wasn't the only reason. We were being told not to wear masks beyond that because masks are ineffective because the virus is hundreds of times smaller than the smallest fibers in most of these masks. Now, N95 can have some stopping power, but beyond that, most people don't know how to put on an N95 mask properly, and they're touching all over it, and they're using it for far too long, so the effectiveness of the mask actually wears out anyway. And some studies show that masks actually increase your risk of developing a respiratory infection, so wearing a mask whether you do or whether you don't, just remember, I'm just going down the timeline. We were originally told not to wear masks. We were told that we can't stop the spread. We were told the best that we could do is flatten the curve so that we could prevent the overwhelm in hospitals. And if we could do this, we could give our medical practitioners time to get ahead of this so that we could save more lives should we have some degree of massive influx of people coming into the hospitals. And then if you recall, what we were shown by the media. The media was showing us images of hospitals in Italy, calling it New York. The media was showing us images of the same little boy multiple times who died from COVID, but the same little boy had, multiple different names. So they were showing us lies in essence. And anybody who was paying attention to this, the media was also reporting that that people who were dying from COVID-19 that actually died from things non-COVID. And so again, part of this is that the media hyped it all up. And so what happens when the media hyped it up is they created more of this, right? They created more of that fear, more of that limbic mindset. But that's not all. If you also go back in time and remember what was happening, again, we were trying to not overwhelm the hospitals. It was Dr. Birx who initially said, call it all COVID. Now, I'm paraphrasing here. That's not exactly what she said, but she said, we're taking a very liberal approach to diagnosing COVID, so that if we think that a person may have had COVID, we're still going to call it COVID, even though we didn't confirm that it was COVID. And go back and remember what I said earlier. The testing for COVID has a very high false positive rate, so the testing wasn't all that accurate. So doctors were calling potentially other diseases COVID. And one of our nation's leaders in this whole deal was okay with that, was okay with throwing science out the window and just calling deaths COVID deaths. Again, artificially inflating the numbers, just like what we saw in Italy. Okay, so you artificially inflate the numbers, and when you artificially inflate the numbers, that creates more fear and more panic in individuals. And so, again, inflating the numbers. Then we add in another thing that to me just doesn't add up, is that the hospitals were being given extra money. They were being incentivized to call things COVID that weren't COVID. So COVID diagnosis in a hospital, they got approximately $13,000 per COVID diagnostics or diagnosis, and they got an additional $39,000 for anybody who went on a respirator. And so the hospitals were being hugely incentivized, because a regular case of influenza, for example, hospitals get about $6,000. Right? So instead of getting that $6,000, now they're getting the $13,000 or the $39,000. So they're actually being incentivized to potentially call things COVID. And if you've watched the media for any length of time, there's some people that are reporting, doctors and nurses reporting, that we were being coerced. We were actually being told to call things COVID, when in the past, the hospital administration never really attempted to push us toward making those types of fudges on paperwork, on documents. So they were actually being coerced by the administrators to call things COVID that weren't necessarily COVID. And then a number of families who had people that died of non-COVID related disease, but they were putting COVID death on the death certificates, came out in the media and actually spoke out about this as well. And so again, how does it, I'm just trying to draw a timeline for you on how it really, a lot of this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It doesn't pass the sniff test. Now, you have all this, and at the end of the day, today, as it stands, we have data, right? So whereas before we were making a lot of decisions, I think policymakers were making decisions, and I don't want to say that all of our policy decision-making people in politics are all bad people and that they're all just out there, and that this is just one mass conspiracy theory to overthrow a government, because I don't think that is necessarily it, not fully anyway. I think what's happened is we were trying to do some things to prevent the potential possibility, because the original model, right, if you remember the original model, which was out of Johns Hopkins hospital systems, was showing. So the original model of disease was showing that we were going to be 1 to 2 million deaths in the U.S. by this point. That obviously has not happened. the model was wrong. So the model was totally broken. The model, models can be manipulated based on the numbers that you crunch into them. And so, I would question the person who did the model, and I would question the people who followed the model, and I would question the people who followed the model originally who are still trying to follow the model when the model has turned out to be wrong. And what did the model say? That if we would shelter in place, we could flatten the curve, and we could not overwhelm the hospitals, and we could save lives. And if we did those things, all would be well, and we could get through this. But what's actually ended up happening now is you've got money incentivizations to hospitals. You've got the shelter in place that will never end. When is this going to end? Because now what's happened is in the name of saving lives, right, by flattening the curve, what have we actually done? I said this last week that the suicide rate in Tennessee in one county was greater than the quantity of COVID deaths. And so when does the shelter in place end, and who are we really saving? Because what we're actually doing is we're creating bankruptcies on a massive scale. And businesses that have been in business for decades are now going out of business. We're affecting people's livelihood in the name of COVID. And in the name of saving a few people, we're destroying businesses. We're destroying lives. And when we destroy businesses, we destroy lives. And when we destroy the economy, we destroy lives. So a lot of this doesn't add up, because if the whole intention in the very beginning was that we couldn't stop the spread of the disease, all we could really do was flatten the curve. And we have flattened the curve. And so now that the curve is flattened, why are so many governors and mayors coming out and declaring orders, draconian-like orders to arrest people? There was a father arrested for throwing the ball to his daughter in a park, in a huge park where there was nobody out there. There were attempted arrests made on beaches. There have been arrests made for people deviating too far away from their home. There are threats that people are going to be arrested if they're conglomerated in greater than groups of 10 to have church services. Yet the curve was flattened. And again, we were told we were never going to prevent the spread of this disease. And just like any other disease, if we look at influenza as an example, and many of you might say, well, influenza is not as dangerous. This disease has a higher mortality rate. No, it doesn't. The numbers are back now. The numbers that we're seeing don't justify the continued draconian measures for the shelter in place. Now, I want to be very clear. This is not me standing up here telling you to go out and riot in the streets. This is me saying that you should be contacting your politicians. You should be peaceful protesting if this is your belief, and if you want to think about this critically, and if you want to protect your rights. Because what's happening with the shelter in place is this actually, it's illegal. This emergency doesn't just immediately magically make your constitutional rights go away. And so your constitutional rights still exist. And what you've got now are mayors and different governors that are illegally forcing you to stay in your home. Now, we could talk about the health ramifications of staying at home, right? When you're in your house and you're not outside, you reduce vitamin D, one of the major substances that we know can actually prevent inflammatory respiratory disease. When you stay at home, you increase massively the quantity of stress, isolation stress. And we know that stress, biochemical stress, causes nutritional loss, nutritional deficiencies. Vitamin C deficiency is depleted. Magnesium is depleted in times of intense stress. Nutrients are lost. And so when you're sheltering in place, many of the things that you're doing in place for the name of, for the sake of the good of the whole is actually not for the sake of the good of the whole, because it actually deteriorates your health nutritionally. It deteriorates your capacity to be healthy. And so if we're doing this for saving lives and we're doing this for health, then what are we really doing? Why is it so important that people stay home right now? Why is it so important that if you leave your house, why is it that you can go to a store like a Home Depot where there's no law enforcement there, and social distancing, which, by the way, social distancing is another thing that it's fishy, because there's no research that says that. So this is all made up. Social distancing is a made up concept. There's no studies that show that social distancing prevents the spread of a viral vector of disease. None at all. Just like the masks The research on the mask is very, very iffy. And the homemade masks, guys, those are a joke. If you're wearing them, all you're really doing is cutting off your oxygen supply. So again, let's just put a mask up here. So we know that masks reduce your O2, your ability to get oxygen, and that your lack of oxygen deteriorates your health nutritionally as well, because now your body can't heal and repair as effectively. So you're stuck behind that mask, and most of the people wearing them don't know how to properly wear them anyway. They're not wearing them right. The masks don't have a whole lot of value because the size of the virus is so small, it goes right through the mask. And your eyes aren't covered. I mean, theoretically, if we really cared about the mask working, we'd also say wear goggles if we were really worried about the potential for the spread. If indeed masks work, goggles would be necessary. But the other thing is, look at all the politicians that are standing up there telling you how you need to stay home when they're not home. Look at all the politicians standing up there saying how you need to wear masks and social distance when they're talking to you. They got people all around them touching them, right? Not wearing a mask, not wearing gloves, not social distancing. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. If it's really about the threat, then why isn't everybody taking the threat equally as serious? And so these are just questions that I have. These are the things that make me think this whole thing is pretty fishy. I think this is the time is up. The jig is up, so to speak, where this whole shelter in place piece it's basically been overplayed, because remember, again, the predominant reason to shelter in place was to stop or flatten the curve, not to stop the spread. The spread has been slowed. The curve has been stopped, or flattened rather. And so what's the point to continue to do that? Is the point to continue to bankrupt people who have families to feed? Is it to create big problems in our economy moving forward in the future? You know, your speculation is as good as mine. I know there's a lot of potential theories, and I'm not going to use the word conspiracy. I think theories are intelligent thought processes that people come to conclusions by observing the world. That doesn't make any of us conspiracy theorists. We are theorizing by looking at the data. We're theorizing by analyzing what's happened and seeing how this thing has played out. And so again, I go back to the data. What is the mortality rate of this virus? Some are speculating that it's 0.1%, that it's as low as that. That's not what we were originally told. We were originally told 1 to 2%, maybe even higher. This is much, much lower. And so it's not as dangerous as the influenza. Now, I know I'm going to lose a lot of followers tonight, and a lot of you are going to probably hate me because maybe you live in New York. But what I'm saying is open your eyes and look at what's going on around you. This doesn't add up. Not all of this makes a ton of sense. And what I want to encourage all of you to do is think with your brains, ask questions, and demand answers from the politicians who are trying to create these policies that are wrecking your lives and bankrupting your lives and inhibiting your freedoms to practice religion, inhibiting your freedoms to convene and to groups, inhibiting your movement, inhibiting your ability to make a living. What's coming next? Now they're inhibiting they're arresting people for potentially breaking the law, but the law doesn't exist, and mayors and governors don't have the right to pass new laws as a sole policymaker. They can't pass. That's what we call kings. And, you know, we live in America where we fought 1776, we fought for our right to not be under the tyranny of kings or people that created laws at whims. So I would encourage you all to think very, very hard on what's happening and to look back at what's gone on over the last several months and ask better questions and demand. I think it's time to demand for all of us to stand up together and demand that those who are lying to us need to be investigated and held accountable for the destruction of lives and for the destruction of people's life work, their life savings, for the destruction of many people's ability to visit their family members or their elderly parents in rest homes, in hospitals. There are people dying that aren't allowed to have their family around over the fear of COVID, when the data shows that it isn't anywhere near as dangerous as it was originally thought to be. So I'm mad, I'm angry, and you should be too, and you should be asking these questions, and I encourage all of you to get out there and do that. So, all right, let's dive into your questions. What questions do you guys have tonight? So Dave says, I'm 72. Would you recommend having my genes tested for 70,000 genetic variants to see if there's anything I need to be concerned with? Not really. Genetic testing is overrated when it comes to your health, your genes, Then there's also bacterial genes, and there's mitochondrial DNA. And we're just now scratching the surface on what we understand. I think if you were to do such an extensive test, I don't think it could give you any super great detailed information that would alter your life in a profound way. Let's see. All right, Lori. Lori says, we love your warrior bread. Thanks, Lori. I'm so glad you're enjoying it. I've got a whole new batch of recipes coming out tomorrow, so pay attention to that. We're going to send that out. What's the max dose of vitamin B6 and for how long to break a deficiency adversely impacting thyroid function? So it's different for different people. Vitamin B6, I mean, you can go 50 to 100 milligrams a day for many months. What you got to be careful of with vitamin B6 is some people have neurological symptoms as a result of staying on it for too long. And again, that's different for different people. There's not like a magic blueprint number. Okay, here. Yeah, I like that. So Sandra says, what's fishy? Same as HIV/AIDS scandals and some of the same players. Yeah, Fauci was one of the players in that game too, wasn't he? Yeah, so there was somebody saying article from Dr. Peter Breggin on COVID-19 SOS saving America from Governor Cuomo. Like Cuomo the other day was quoting, he said, hey, a beautiful day outside is the most dangerous thing we could have. Like, how ridiculous is that? Like, go inside and hide. Many of you that are going inside and hiding, not only does it reduce your vitamin D and increase your stress, but you know, when you live in, and especially in newer homes or even in older homes, maybe there's mold in the building. So maybe you're stuck in an area where you're sucking down mold spores all day and you're not getting outside and getting fresh air. And so that's building up and deteriorating your health. Maybe there's new paint on the walls. So you've got VOCs that are circulating through that home, creating potential and inflammatory damage and oxidizing damage into your lungs, into your body. So again, none of this adds up. None of this makes sense. Let's see here. Yeah, Stephanie chimes in. Fear and panic will lower your immunity and make you more susceptible to illness. Exactly. Good point. And that was something else we didn't mention. And somebody chimed in. They said, yeah, JD says that hospitals are now empty. So that's another thing that I didn't even mention in this is that here we tried to save the hospitals from being overwhelmed, and they were never overwhelmed. They were always underwhelmed. There was never a hospital that was at capacity. Some of them got busier, but not at capacity. And so many hospitals and hospital systems were furloughing workers or letting people go. Again, it doesn't make sense why this model was being followed that led to this problem. Let's see. Yeah, I saw that. So PB&J Astronaut, that's a great YouTube name, by the way. PB&J Astronaut says CDC reduced COVID deaths to 37,000 the other day, but news outlets are still using the 67,000 number, heavily padded COVID death number. Yeah, so that was something else that happened that I didn't even mention. The CDC actually dropped the death count from 67 down into the 30s. As a result of more accurate reporting. So why isn't the media being responsible in their reporting? Is there a hidden agenda? To me, I think probably one of the biggest culprits in all this is the media needs to be held accountable for the lies, for the disinformation that they've put out there, because again, they have a public duty and a public responsibility because they're airing on public airwaves that are paid for by our tax dollars. And it's enough is enough. Man, if you're not mad, I don't know, you're living under a rock somewhere. So questions coming in, are they trying to push another vaccine on us? Well, this is the banter and the rhetoric that you're hearing right now. And you're hearing it from a lot of people who are governors and in power in some of the kind of, I would say, the more draconian type states and cities where the shelter in place is no longer it's no longer justified. At all in most places. And so what we're seeing and what we're hearing is we're hearing people say the new normal. It's the new normal. Get used to it. No, it isn't the new normal. Having your freedoms taken away should not ever be the new normal in the United States of America. I mean, I'm a veteran and I fought, and my grandfather fought, and my father-in-law fought, and my son fought. So we all fought for those rights and served in the military so that we wouldn't have to have this BS about a new normal. This whole language that's being used, they're trying to psychologically condition you into believing that we somehow will not return to a new normal unless there's a vaccine. Now, influenza has a vaccine and influenza is not gone. So how is it that we're not, in influenza arguably has a higher mortality rate than coronavirus, COVID-19. So how is it that there's a vaccine that's less effective? So some would say it's 20% effective 20% of the time. Now, you have to remember that COVID-19 is an RNA virus. And what does that mean? RNA viruses, and that's even if we agree that it's a virus. Some people would argue, and I think scientifically this hasn't actually been shown. We haven't actually been shown COVID-19 under an electron microscope to prove that it's actually a virus. But if you buy that it is a virus, then we know that it's RNA, and so that means it is less stable and that it has more or a greater ability to change over time. Just like influenza, the viruses morph, the viruses change. And this is why with the vaccine, annual vaccine for the flu, right? And that's why it very rarely works all that well. It's because the virus mutates, and RNA viruses are less stable and mutate even more rapidly. So people saying that we're not going to be able to return to a new normal unless we have a vaccine are morons because they don't know basic science. Actually, I don't even think it's that they're morons. I think the people that are saying this are incentivized because there's an underlying agenda. And there's probably, as the old saying goes, follow the dollars and you'll get your truth. Follow the money and truth will be revealed. And, I think part of this agenda, think what you will about Gates, but I think there's too many areas where it looks like his hand is dipped into the profitability of what's going on here. And so I think he's one of those that as a people, we should demand that our politicians investigate his role in this, because I don't know when Gates got his doctorate degree, and I don't know when he got elected. We didn't elect him as an official to create policy or to dictate how we react to something along this line. He just has billions of dollars we can fund a foundation and look pretty. But at the end of the day, we don't put foxes in the hen house. It's a bad idea. And when you got the fox in the hen house, who's the guy who stands to make the most by having this done, you don't let that guy make the decisions. I mean, look at what he did in the realm of computers. If you look at the computers he built, yes, lots of people have home computers, and life has altered in a great way with computers. But if you want to follow the analogy, he also created computers that were highly susceptible to viruses, and he profited greatly on that susceptibility to viruses by rolling out fixes and bugs and new computers and everything else. So is this kind of just another level of that? I don't know, but I speculate in that regard. Okay, let's see here. Yep, some of you chiming in, the deaths that are going to happen from suicide due to job loss and isolation. There's no doubt that's going to unfortunately pan out over the next many years. It's going to be a sad thing to watch. Let's see. Lisa says, taking ultra liver detox, is it best in the morning or the night? Full or empty stomach? Best to take with food, not necessarily a full stomach, but just with food. You can take it morning or night. Timing is not all that relevant, morning or night. So what do I think? So Soon wants to know, what do I think about the IgG and IgM antibody tests that give you a result in 15 minutes? Verdict is still out soon. I mean, I'm conflicted, and the reason why I'm conflicted is because it's not that I don't believe that there is a virus, and as some people are saying, there's not even a virus. I believe there are people that are dying from a new virus. However, because it hasn't followed strictly the process of science, how can we have tests to identify it when we haven't identified it scientifically? We haven't validated and identified it scientifically. So to me, at this point, any type of testing to identify it is very, very flawed. Again, one of the areas where I'm conflicted, because at one end of the spectrum, we're saying the cases of the virus are high, and on the other end, we're saying the tests are flawed. And on the other end, we're saying the virus has never actually been shown to cause infection because the Koch's postulates weren't followed scientifically. So the actual good research wasn't done. And so here we all are chasing nutritional supplements, chasing potential medicines like hydroxychloroquine and other antivirals to something that doesn't have the scientific backing at this point. Again, this is why I'm really super conflicted. And I think we should probably, if we're going to do anything, we realize that this thing is nowhere near as deadly as what the models projected, and that they were wrong, and that we get back to living, but we go back and analyze where this thing actually came from and actually why all this started in the first place. To me, going back to the beginning is where we're going to find the answers. I just don't think that anybody's going to do that. Okay, let's see here. How soon after exposure to COVID will the antibodies show up in the blood? That's another good question. It depends on your immune system. So if you're immunosuppressed, it's potentially going to take longer. Again, and that's saying that the antibody testing itself is actually valid. Going back to where I'm conflicted. So I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer than that, Christy. Carol wants to know if I have NAC, N-A-C. I'm going to assume you mean N-acetylcysteine, Carol. And the answer is yeah. I'll have Mel drop a link into the feed for you if you're looking to get a hold of some NAC as a nutritional supplement. Megan, let's see. Megan said, I had severe antibiotics. I lost 10 pounds in 10 days and 2 surgeries for mistreated appendicitis less than a year ago. Am I still immunocompromised? It's a tough call. I mean, are you? I don't know if you are. I mean, that's not enough information to really be able to ascertain. I would say if any of your updated or newer blood work showed that your white blood cell counts were low, I would say that that's immunocompromised. I would say if your nutritional status is poor and your diet is highly processed food, you're immunocompromised. I'd say if you're a drinker or smoker, you're highly immunocompromised. I mean, there are a lot of things that add up to the equation of, is somebody immunocompromised? And probably one of the biggest in this country, in our country, is people, yes, that have been on round after round of antibiotics. They compromise your immune function. Also, people that are on steroids, whether it's an asthma inhaler or whether you got injected for steroid for pain or whether you're taking an oral steroid to block inflammation, you're being immunocompromised. People that have autoimmune disease that are taking immunosuppressing medications, the TNF alpha inhibitors, so the family of drugs that are immunosuppressive, those are the ones that are, in my opinion, the greatest at risk for being immunocompromised. Okay, let's see here. So Vlad says, totally wrong statements about masks. I'd like you to prove me wrong, Vlad. It's not totally wrong. The research is pretty clear on masks. There are only about half a dozen studies actually on masks and the spread of infectious viral diseases. So I'm not wrong. There's no valid research, and the research on homemade masks shows that it increases your risk for disease, for viral or for respiratory disease. So all of you that are buying these masks online that aren't N95 certified, all of you that are creating your own homemade masks and shutting off your oxygen, I'm going to say it, you're fools for doing it. Quit doing it. And not only is it a bad move for your health, but for some of these stores, that's interesting. So like there's Menards and Home Depot that are now saying you can't come in the store and shop unless you're wearing a mask. So they're telling you what you have to do in order for you to shop. My advice would be don't shop there anymore. Let them speak with your dollars I wouldn't even argue with them. Me personally, I'm going to Lowe's. And the reason why, number one, is Lowe's gives you, if you're a veteran, they give you a 10% discount, which I think is awesome. They also have veteran parking spots. And they cater to what's true and what's right, and they're not trying to, again, pass draconian measure in the guise. You got to understand, a lot of these corporations and companies, they're doing this stuff as CYA. They're not doing it for your best interest. They're doing it so nobody will sue them, and that's not the right reason to do it. We shouldn't do things out of fear of being sued. Remember, we make decisions out of fear. We typically make the wrong decision. We want to make intelligent decisions, and we want to take a stand for something. What should we stand for? The ultimate thing that we should all stand for is truth. The unrelenting pursuit of truth. Isn't that really what it's about? And if any of you have read No Grain, No Pain, my book, in the opening paragraph, one of the things I say in this book is the only way forward is to be brutally honest with yourself first, right? And if we're all truthful to ourselves, if we don't look in the mirror and lie to ourselves, then we're going to find that truth, and whatever that truth is, whatever your truth is, it's going to be intelligent decision-making that comes from this. But when people make decisions, like these companies make decisions out of fear and CYA, look, turn them off. Speak with your dollar, and don't shop there, because it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that even really that this is considered an essential business when elective surgeries and people being able to visit their doctor, people being able to visit and have a meeting with their dentist is not considered essential, yet buying lumber at Home Depot is somehow more essential. This is just one of those things. It's fishy. It doesn't add up. Why do we have, who gets to dictate what is essential? For me, buying lumber right now, maybe that's essential for my happiness and essential for my pursuit of happiness. And if my pursuit of happiness doesn't affect your pursuit of happiness, and the state of, and again, people are so willing to give up their rights. We're calling this a state of emergency that hasn't panned out, right? And I get the initial fear. I get the initial excitement because I was a victim of it too. But as it stands, it no longer makes sense. Again, I'm going to keep harping on that, but okay. So back that up just a little bit on the Facebook feed, because Susan says we don't have a choice with masks. They're mandated in California if can't maintain a 6-foot distance. Susan, I would ask this question: who mandated it? Oh, I'm writing your name. Who mandated that mask was law? That's not a law. Governor Newsom doesn't have any rights to pass any laws on the citizens of California. You only allow that to happen because you don't do anything about it, or you don't say anything about it. And if you all treat the governor's dictatorial orders as if they're now new laws, yes, you're going to lose your rights. Look at the state of California. Has very little cases, very little deaths, and they're locking the whole state down and filling parks in with sand and telling people what they can and can't do. And they don't have the right to destroy your freedoms. One man doesn't have that right. One man and his policymakers around him don't have that right. So I would say it's the citizens of California that need to take a stand. It's not an issue of whether or not you have a choice. You always have a choice. My uncle taught me this. My uncle was a chiropractor, and he was part of the chiropractic group years and years ago that went to jail because why? They had a right. They were being accused of practicing medicine without a license, and the art of chiropractic and the science of chiropractic is anything but medicine, but they were being accused of practicing medicine, and he had a choice. He chose to practice anyway, and he was put in jail. You have a choice, and that's not a law. They can put you in jail, but you've got to be able to willing and to stand up and be willing to go to jail, even though you didn't break the law, because you can't break a law that doesn't exist. But you've got to be willing to take it to that level if you're going to accomplish anything, especially those of you who live in Illinois, those of you who live in California, those of you who live in New York. You got to stand up. It's not, they don't have the power. You do. But if you give your power over to them, then they do have the power. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, Elaine says the restrictions put into place will kill me before COVID-19 does because I'm stuck spending more time in a moldy home. There's no doubt about that's what I was saying earlier, the whole thing. Yeah, so Fortnite asks, are Koch's postulates consistently used nowadays anyway? They should be, but they're not. Remember, it's the crux of the, you got to understand, one of the biggest theories of disease is the germ theory of disease. And if we're going to be scientists about it, and we're going to call it a germ-based disease, we have to be able to prove Koch's postulates with it. Does that mean that everybody is doing it? No, but it's the same thing in medicine. Do all doctors, when they swear the Hippocratic Oath, do they follow it? First do no harm? No. So just because it's not being followed doesn't mean that it shouldn't be followed, and it doesn't mean that we as people shouldn't question the lack of it being followed in great integrity. Okay, let's see. Boy, lots of random questions come in. Is NAC, can you take NAC on an empty stomach or with food? It's best taken with food, but it's best taken without protein. So when you take it, don't take it with like chicken breast, because the protein amino acids in the chicken breast are going to compete with the NAC for absorption. So take it with like a piece of fruit or vegetables, but not a heavy protein-based meal, but take it with food. John says, why is more not being said about herd immunity? I don't know, because herd immunity, the way we develop herd immunity is we get exposure, right? And so if you get exposure, then the herd immunity develops. So it doesn't make sense to hide in your house. Look, to me, the best thing that you can do is get out there and get exposure so that herd immunity can happen the quickest. Everybody that's saying that, look, the elderly are at risk and you're actually going to kill old people if you go out and you get in the public and you get exposure and then come back and bring them exposure. No, we don't quarantine the world to save some. This is democracy. It's what is good for the whole, not what is good for the few. Certainly, we want to make as much as we can possible that is good for the few as well, but that would include quarantining the few away from the whole. One of the other things I didn't bring up that's fishy is, why are I won't call them homeless, I'm going to call them bums, because that's what they really are. They're bums and drug users that haven't been properly filtered. But why are these individuals not being rounded up? Why are they not being rounded up and said, look, where does this unstable RNA virus, where's it going to mutate? It's going to mutate in the drug-using, malnourished population. Why are these people not being rounded up and taken off the streets? It's something else that doesn't make sense. If it's about your safety, like here in Fort Bend County where I live, the law that was passed, it wasn't a law, but it was the judge's decree or the judge's order, excluded the homeless. It said these individuals don't have to follow. Why does everyone else who's a tax-paying citizen who works for a living have to follow a decree when the people in the streets don't? So that didn't make sense to me either. Anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up because I forgot to mention it earlier. Okay, let's see. How would I have handled the pandemic? I don't know, Lisa. That's a great question. So here I am being kind of a backseat or a sidearm driver or side chair quarterback. I don't know how I would have handled it. I think I would have at least gathered as many of the actual facts as I could have done before making a bunch of decisions. But I'm not saying that our president necessarily handled it wrong. I'm saying where it was largely handled incorrectly was after the shelter in place was done, and states continued to force businesses to stay out of business. Like you can't shut down somebody's ability to earn a livelihood. I think that's where the biggest mistakes were made. I don't know that necessarily that mistakes were made in the way it was handled up to a certain point. But I think now we have all this data that's come back, and we're like questioning, well, why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why are we releasing prisoners? Why is that safer? Why did we just release a bunch of sex convicts into the streets in the name of protecting them from COVID, when now, what about the population? What about tax-paying citizens who now have to deal with these people that our tax dollars and our court systems convicted as criminals, and now they're being released back into the population? Is that safe for us? That doesn't make sense either. So it's, again, we're arresting dads for playing in the park with their daughters, but we're letting prisoners go for the sake of COVID. None of it is really adding up. Again, there's just too many things that don't add up. Elaine wants to know what's an exosome. An exosome is a particulate inside of cells that we really aren't quite sure what they are, but they can kind of look like viruses. They're in the same size range. Viruses and exosomes are about the same size. And this is what I was referring to earlier. Until you can actually identify the virus as a transmittable disease by applying Koch's postulates, you don't know whether what you're actually measuring, because, again, the tests, the DNA tests, the PCR tests for COVID-19 are measuring strands of DNA presence that could actually be exosomes, and that may be one of the reasons why we have the false positive rate. So an exosome is a structure inside a cell that might just be like a hunk of RNA that isn't technically a virus, but it's actually part of us, but we're identifying it and calling it a virus. And because they're in that same size range, unless we can get a electron microscope to actually take a picture of the virus itself and then apply Koch's postulates to the virus in terms of causing disease, we really don't have any ground to stand on to be taking away Americans' freedoms, especially when the death rates are so low, lower than influenza at this point. Margie says, if I had a patient with COVID, how would you tell them to treat it? Well, so I wouldn't tell them to treat it. I would tell them to treat their bodies. I would tell them to strengthen their bodies, because the only real way through this is to, your body's defense is the best offense. And so what can we do to improve immune function? What can we do to improve a person's capacity? I would encourage a person, any person, whether they had COVID or not, if they're trying to improve their immune system or trying to support their immune system in a strong manner, to use high doses of oral vitamin C. Why? Because the research studies show that high doses of oral vitamin C at 6 to 8 grams a day, if you do come down with COVID, for example, or maybe another viral issue, well, there aren't any studies on COVID and vitamin C, not orally like this, but the studies on other viruses show that level of vitamin C reduces your ICU stay time by 20% and increases your ability to recover. So I would definitely encourage high doses of vitamin C. I would encourage high doses of N-acetylcysteine or NAC. I would encourage quercetin with zinc. Those would be the main things that I would encourage somebody to use, because those are the things in research that have the most profound and researched antiviral impact. Again, none of this has been studied with COVID because we haven't had time to look at that in that way, but they've been studied in other viral infectious diseases that have been proven to exist. I like that. Stephanie says, Costco member since 2003, canceled because I will not wear a mask. Love it. Speak with your dollar. That is the power of living in America. You get to speak. There's so many of us and so few of them. Speak with your money. It speaks volumes. And share it. When you speak with your money and share it with 10 friends who also speak with theirs, they're going to feel the pain. Somebody said the new scare is the murder hornet. I think the media just throws that out there to kind of distract you from, it's a sideshow gig, right? It's a circus going on out there right now. And so they throw something in like murder hornet to distract you from what actually is going on, which is the theft and the rape of our country's resources and small businesses and people. We've had arguably the largest transfer of wealth in the last several months as a result of crushing businesses and falling stock market. Let's see. Yeah, so we'll have to do a show on that. So like, what's the connection with the global food system and the medical system and the farming industry, and how that all plays together to keep people, in my opinion, to keep them sick? Because when you keep people sick, you keep them from being able to access their internal hard drive, their internal computer, right? When you're sick, you don't think right. You're brain foggy. You can't recall as well. You don't have the energy to fight or to argue when you're sick. And so the best way to silence the masses is to keep the masses in ill health. And if you look at America, we're 50% obese, and that inflammation, that certainly doesn't bode well for the intelligence of the nation as they as they continue to get sicker and sicker and sicker. Let's see here. Yeah, so somebody's asking about the factors of metabolic disease or metabolic disorders affecting COVID deaths. There certainly are comorbidity factors. The large bulk of people who are accurately being reported dying actually have pre-existing metabolic disease, things like hypertension and diabetes. But I'll go one up above that. It's not even just that they have those conditions, it's that they are being medicated for those conditions. And for many people, it's the medication that suppresses the immune system, causes the malnourishment over time, in the name or in the sake of trying to reduce your risk for a disease. The medicines actually slowly deteriorate your health without an end in sight. So I would argue that the people with the greatest comorbidities are the ones that are on the most medications, not necessarily the ones with the most diseases, because oftentimes, as an example, a person will initially, when they go to their doctor, they'll be told they have high cholesterol, which is not even really a disease state. And then they'll be put on a medication, and the medication can cause CoQ10 deficiency and vitamin D deficiency, which can then in turn cause high blood pressure. So then they go back 6 months later, now they have high blood pressure, so they're being put on a medication to lower their blood pressure, and that medication causes magnesium deficiency, and magnesium deficiency causes increased platelet aggregation, increases blood viscosity, increases the risk of stroke and heart attack. And so now they're being asked to get on blood thinners, and the cycle just never ends. And so when you end up drugging yourself with 5+ medications, and the guise of, hey, these things are actually going to help improve your health, and the fact is they're not improving your health at all. They're stealing your health, and they're stealing your ability to become empowered with knowledge to make meaningful changes to your diet and lifestyle, because we all know that all the comorbidities that they're talking about for COVID-19, which is metabolic syndrome, which is being overweight, which is high blood pressure, which is existing heart disease or existing diabetes, those are all diseases of choice. For upwards of more than 90% of the people that have them, minus your rare occasional genetic issues that might crop up, pretty much diseases of choice. So no amount of drugs is going to solve your bad choices. It just doesn't work that way. Okay. So Andrea says, your talk makes me feel a lot better just knowing that I'm not alone and thinking things are messed up. It's been a depressing day as I'm a small business owner, and it breaks my heart to see everything I've worked for in the last few decades fall apart because of fear and media hype. Andrea, my thoughts and prayers go out to you. I get it, because your life is being destroyed in a different way. Some would argue that you're being selfish by wanting to open your business. I would say, at what point in our society did we do what was good for the lesser quantity of people and ignore the greater whole and destroy a nation in an attempt to save a few lives? It doesn't make sense. Yeah, so Carol says, my son just moved back to Staten Island. He was jogging in an empty park, and people were yelling out their cars that he was spreading the disease. Because people are ignorant. And there are a lot of ignorant folks out there that don't understand. They're not critical thinkers. Those are the people that are sick, and they have the greatest fear because they are already sick, and they've been told that people who are already sick have the greatest risk. So they have this, they have in their own minds their justified fear, although I wouldn't call it justified. The reason they're sick is because they made bad choices. So why would we put them in charge of making more choices for us? Because generally the people that own the small businesses, generally the people that go to work every day and do the right thing every day, are the people that are the backbone of this country. And if we let the people who want to stay home, or if we incentivize unemployment, which is another thing that doesn't add up here, we're giving an extra additional quantity of dollars to people to stay at home and to disincentivize them from ever going back to work. A lot of people now are making more money than they made when they had a job. And where's the incentivization to go back out into the society and into the community? Anyway. So some in California, somebody's saying they've taken the homeless or the bums and they put them in the hotel rooms. Now let's think about what that's going to do to the hotel business. You think I'm going to travel to California anytime soon and stay in a hotel there after they've let the homeless just have their way? No, thank you. That's going to destroy tourism in California. It was a bad decision. They should. Well, I won't go there. They should have gotten them off the streets a long time ago, and we shouldn't be waiting on what we thought was a pandemic to take action against such a threat to society, because the homeless people are a threat to society. It's why a lot of drugs are done. It's why a lot of deviant sex is done. It's where a lot of germs are spread. It's where a lot of viruses and other diseases go to mutate. And any good, hardworking, tax-paying citizen doesn't want to walk through human feces to try to get into a restaurant and have a meal. It's just not. That's just not okay. And the politicians have allowed that to happen because there's big business in catering to people who are the dregs of society. Again, follow the money and you get most of your answers. Let's see. Okay, so Sylvia says, one of my sons has been immunodeficient apparently since birth. He's using vitamin C powder and several other supplements daily. I read that AHCC may help a person's white blood cells fight off infections. Do you think it's something that might help him? You know, the bigger question here, Sylvia, is why is he immunodeficient? Doesn't matter that he was born and he's been that way at birth. If he's immunodeficient, there's another underlying reason as to why that needs to be solved. And so that's what I would more encourage you to do is have him approach his health through functional medicine, functional nutrition. Yeah. So thank you, Shelley. So she says, when doctors speak out like you, I know you're with God. There's no doubt about it. And we're going to have a major fallout. So this is again why I've taken great risk in even having this conversation with you guys tonight. You have no idea the risks that we are taking on behalf of truth, on behalf of the pursuit of truth, because at the end of the day, that's all that really matters, is that we have our abilities, we have our freedoms to pursue truth, and that those things are never taken away from us and our children and our grandchildren. America is the light of the world, and anybody who will tell you otherwise hasn't spent time in a communist nation, hasn't spent time in a socialist nation where the rights don't exist. I have. I've been to those places in the world. And to me, those of you who don't believe that America is the best place that has ever existed in the world in modern recorded history, I would just advise you to move somewhere else that's better. You won't find it. Okay, let's see here. So let's see. Lisa says, I've developed breathing issues since all of this started. Doctor gave me an inhaler, what to do. What you might ask your doctor to do, Lisa, is ask him for a nebulizer with glutathione. If he gave you an asthma inhaler, like an inhaler that's a steroid inhaler, that can be immunosuppressive, but you might ask him to write you a prescription for nebulized glutathione, where you can take glutathione into the lungs directly. For many people, that helps quite a bit. You might also consider, if you're not already following the no grain, no pain protocol, like diving into that diet, because it's very anti-inflammatory. And for many people, we have so many case studies of people who had asthma or had breathing problems that when following that diet protocol pretty much eradicated their breathing issue just through diet alone. So if you haven't changed your diet, that might be another avenue. That might be another avenue that you can take. So again, many of you are saying in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and Virginia, the government's mandated it. They cannot mandate that you do something. You have to understand that they cannot pass new laws. That's what Congress and the Senate and the president are for the passing of new laws. Your state governors can't do that. They can't impose or take away your free will. It's illegal. What they're doing is illegal, and you and your states have to stand up together in a peaceful way to ensure that you can maintain your freedoms. I can't emphasize that enough. Look, get with some of these groups that are joining hands together to conquer this tyranny that's cropping up in our society right now in the name of COVID-19 protection. Look, you can't take away freedoms in the name of safety. When you do that, you end up losing your freedoms. Let's see here. Machiavelli says ACE inhibitors theoretically should reduce viral load. No, not true. ACE inhibitors upregulate ACE2 receptors, and it's ACE2 receptors that are the theoretical entry point for the virus into the cell, which is why ACE inhibitors actually increase the risk of the development of an infection. Yeah, so again, I would just say, look, I would say those of you who are scared, those of you who don't want to get out in public, those of you who feel like you need to wear a mask, do those things. This is not me telling you not to do those things. But if you feel like you're scared and you need to stay at home, then stay at home and self-quarantine. But quit criminalizing the rest of us who have the ability to think and see and read between the lines. And look, we can all agree to disagree at a certain point. But we can also do that in a humane and in a respectful manner. And so, again, a lot of the hate and the rhetoric that's spilling out of both sides, doesn't matter what side of this you're on. You guys got a better idea of what side I'm on tonight. But look, the reality is we can all respect each other's wishes. We can all pursue our own happinesses and pursue our own dreams without compromising other people. And so those of you who are scared, stay home. If you're scared, stay home. If you stay home and you quarantine yourself, you've got nothing to worry about if the government's not lying. If, however, the government's lying, by you staying home, really, it's not going to help you. It probably will hurt you. And at the end of the day, the numbers and the data that are coming in on this whole pandemic don't add up to the level of shelter in place and locking down an entire nation. The consequences we haven't even yet begun to understand. I talked last week about food shortages. If you didn't watch that, please go back and watch that. Look, I love you all, and I want you all to be prepared for the next coming year to 2 years. Again, I'm not trying to fearmonger, but I want you to be prepared, because if you're prepared, if something does happen to that nature, to that magnitude, you won't have to worry quite as much as others who are not prepared. So do your best to get prepared. We're going to wrap it up. We're over time. I'm wishing you all excellent health. Look, if you haven't already signed up for our newsletter, if you're new to the show, make sure you come over and visit me at glutenfreesociety.org. Sign up for our newsletter. If you want to change your diet, if you want to start getting healthy, if you want to start building your immune system, come on over. I got lots of free, wonderful, great information for you there. But sign up for our newsletter so we can get it into your hands in an organized fashion. Wishing you excellent health. This is Dr. Osborne. We'll see you next week. Hey, don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, for another Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain show. Bring all your toughest health questions to me. I look forward to answering them. And before you leave today, make sure you hit subscribe. And once you do, click that bell. That bell is going to allow us to remind you right before we go live. But it's also going to allow us to remind you when we come out with other video content all week long. We've got lots of episodes coming your way all week long, and I don't want you to miss anything. So again, subscribe, hit that bell so that you can get notified when we have that new information put up for you. Thanks so much, and I'm wishing you excellent health. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night.